Hi everyone, in today's video we will know the explanation of my microservice repository, that is GTS Timezone service. The first thing is go to your GitHub account and open your repository GTS Timezone service. This is my repository. Here we can import this or cloning your repository in local machine. There are two ways. The first one is go to this code and copy this URL, go to your application. Here go to Explorer, set the clone repository and then select the folder where GTS Timezone service. Yeah, this is my repository. Then select the repository destination. So this is the one way of cloning your repository in local machine using GitHub. It takes some time. Open. This is the one way of your cloning the repository. The another way is go to your GitHub account and here download zip file. After downloading, extract this file in specific folder and go to this folder, open, go to command prompt. Here is the command code space dot. This is another way of cloning your repository in local machine. These all are the components of my microservice. The first we will know the requirements to run the service in your application. You will need certain software environment requirements. The first is install the latest version of your application and also install the necessary workload. So I am installing Visual Studio. There's some other applications like Eclipse, IntelliJ like this, and later this we used to install the database setup, database management system to configure a compatible database system. Here I am using MySQL. I am already installing that. Then API requirements to Postman or similar tools for testing your API. So testing your API endpoints, we can use the Postman or other similar tools to send requests and inspect the responses. And later this configure the file. Insert your application as necessary configuration files like settings, JSON files to test the DB connection, means database connection and logging, etc. Then dependencies, it likes some packages in Visual Studio to install dependencies or other some libraries for logging and JWT handling, etc. It requires some packages and libraries. Then environment variables specific environment variables like API keys and JWT secrets. So set up this in local environments, and later we use the source control system like Git. You have already cloning the repository using Git to manage your code base. After all this, we can build and run the configuration. So we can use the mvn clean package command to build this, and also we use the read and documentation. This helps to as a specific setup or run the instruction using refer the documentation. It helps to avoid the missing any crucial steps. So the one by one we will know. The Maven helps. It's a powerful build automation and a project management tool for Java application. It automatically manages the project dependencies. The next one is API design. So API design, it helps to understand the purpose and identify the resources you want to expose, and also determine the operations, CRUD operations like create, update, receive, delete you need. It's like a blueprint. It contains the Excel sheet. I will show you. This is the Excel sheet of API design. So here there is a functions, request JSON, condition and response like this. Here there is a endpoints, functionalities. So API design helps to understand what problems the API will solve. So here it contains the some APIs what we will solve, and here we using the REST API. It's a standard HTTP methods. Here there is a methods that is post, put, get, delete. These are all the methods, and it design the API structure endpoints. It represent the resources. This resource is a time zone, and it establish the data formats, that is a response and request format. Here we can see this is the request format and this is the response format, and it include the API versioning. Here we can see API v1. This is the versioning of API, the URL we are using, and we can also implement this authentication mechanism to secure the API. And also here we use the HTTP status code to indicate the result of API request. Here we can see in the request format GTS time zone status, and when it's response, it's in the format of status code, that is 201. I means it's created successfully. It's shown in the status code, and also it indicates the result. API result means responses in the form of description. It contains the messages GTS time zone is created successfully like this. And also we are using API testing tools like Postman test to endpoints during the dependencies. So when we test the API in the Postman, we can testing the tools in the endpoints. So these are all the methods we are testing. The post method, post means is creating new one, and it put method helps to updating, and get method it retrieves the data, and delete the time zone which one is selected like this. This is API design, helps to solve the problems. And the next is DB design. DB design is also a Excel sheet. It's a database design to understand the application requirements and identify what data will be stored, retrieve and manage, how it will be used. Here we can see the Excel sheet of database design. Here it contains the column name, data types and primary key, foreign key, it's unique or not, like this. So database is like a entity and attributes. This is the attributes that say GTS time zone ID, name, description, status. These attributes are characteristics of the entities. And here we can see ID is in the type of big int, and it's a primary key because it's unique. So every one ID is a unique ID. And the name we using the varchar. It's in the string format, and its name also is a unique. And the description is in the form of varchar. Data type is varchar. Here it's not a unique. Description means it's created. Sometimes we are using same format. It's all created successfully like this. And the status Status means it's a description. Status code, we can see 201. The status code is created successfully. We can display the 201 code, or it's an error we using the 400 like this. So it's not a unique, and it's using the primary key and foreign key. So primary key is a unique identifier. The foreign key is a one table that links to the primary key of the another table like this. And the next is DB script. DB script, it contains the database tables. It helps to create the database tables. Here we can see create table GTS time zone. It contains ID, name, description, or ID in the form of big integer, and it's a primary key, and the name is in the string. Description also is in the string varchar, and the status is a bit, it's in the boolean format like this. So it helps to create the tables. And here DB script, we can create a time zone table and user token table and GTS user. So it's a database table. It contains the user ID, email, password, status like this. So DB script helps to creating the database script. Involves writing SQL commands to set up the database schema, include tables. You can execute the script. So here I am using MySQL database. So some of them using MongoDB like this. The next is a Postman collection. So Postman collection, we can import this Postman collection to improve our workflow when working with the microservices. So it helps to testing the API. Also it's not running in this Visual Studio, but it helps to improve the workflow and testing the API in the Postman application. The next is a source. In the source folder, it contains the assembly and main. In the assembly, there is a bin.xml. Bin.xml file is not a standard file. Here we can see it's not a standard file. It may refer to a binary configuration file. It's a configuration. We can see the URL and schema location. The format is in the zip format like this. XML file is used to manage the configuration. Basically it's like a directory. So it's not a standard file. Then go to main. There is a Java and resources. Java contain certain folders, and resources contains the application properties. So here we can see one by one. This is a cache file. It contains the cache manager.java. It helps to design and manage your user tokens. Here we can see manage user token. Yes, we see we using the key as a user token. Using Redis as a caching solution. Here we can see Redis as a caching solution. Here we using the annotation as a repository. Repository is a Spring data. It's automatically detected and managed the Spring, and we use the super warnings, raw types, and also auto void. Here we not specify any methods. It's in raw types. So auto void helps to inject instance of Redis template. It helps to interact, and we use the key as a user token, which are stored in the Redis, and we using two parameters. Here we can see we are using the two parameters. One is user ID, long user ID, another one is string token. Here there is a saving token. Here we can use saving tokens in the Redis format. It's an any error occurs, it's throw on the exception is false. Otherwise it gives a true. The next one is we can get user token by ID, means it retrieves the data. Here we use the string to return the token, and also we delete the user token using a ID. It can be written, it can delete the user token successfully, it return true, otherwise it throw an exception like this. And the next one is configuration. Here there are three configuration. One is coarse config and local config and the simple coarse filter.java. Here coarse config. So first we will know what is coarse. So coarse is a cross origin resource sharing. Is a HTTP header based protocol that enables resource sharing between the different origins or indicates the any origin. The first thing we know, declare the package and import the necessary annotations, and here we using the annotation is a configuration and enable web MVC. Configuration helps to indicate the class contains Spring configuration, and enable web MVC allow you to customize the configuration, and here we extend the web configuration support. It is to configuring the web, and here we adding the resource handler using the parameter. It helps to setting the MVC feature, provide configuration methods, and here we had the coarse mapping using registry is a mapping a database tables. So here we use the methods like put, delete, get, post methods we are using, and also setting the maximum age in the form of seconds. Is determine how the server respond to the request from different origins. The next one is local configuration. So local configuration is responsible for setting up a connection in the Redis using a JD's connection factory. So here we implement the web MVC configure. It indicates that class provide a additional configuration. So web MVC configuration helps to provide the additional configuration for Spring MVC. Here we creating the Redis connection. Here we can see Redis connection configuration equals new Redis standard. Here we creating the Redis configuration. It helps to set the configuration, set host name, port number and password, so means authenticating. And also here we using the Redis template. It specify the key in the string and object value or in the object. And here we using the set the connection factory using Redis connection factory. Its setting is successfully, it print the answers and Redis connection is successful. And also set the key serializer and hash key serializer and the set value serializer and enable the transaction support. After setting all these properties correctly, then it return the Redis template, otherwise it throw an exceptions. The next is simple coarse filter. Simple coarse filter, here also we can first declare the packages and using the necessary Java IO exceptions, Spring framework can be imported, and here we use the component annotations. It helps to managing the Spring Bean. So its Spring will automatically detected where we implements the filter. The filter requires defining several methods to handle the request and response. Several information can be handled. Here we using the log factory. So log factory logging, it helps to log. Here we can see public simple core filter log.info. So log, it helps to message is logged when filter is initiated, message can be logged. Here override the do filter method. It helps to request and responses and the filter chain. And also here we throw the exceptions. I want servlet exception. Here we can see HTTP servlet request and responses. Yes, it responds in the form of header. It allow origin and it can be response in the format of origin, and also it's a credential. It can be successfully initiated, show true or otherwise false. And also it's allow the methods like post method, get method like this. And also it set the maximum age in the format of seconds. And also it's control access control the headers and content type like this. So filter basically helps to several methods to handle the request and responding, and also initializing the reinstantiating the filter configuration, and it destroys. The next is controller. Controller is a GTS time zone controller. Here first is package declaration and import the necessary Java Spring frameworks and exception like this. Here we using the REST controller, cross origin and request mapping annotation. In the request mapping we can use the necessary URL path we can set. Here we can see time zone path can be set, and REST controller provides indicates the class in the RESTful controller, and it's easier to return the JSON responses, and cross origin enabling to control the request from different origin. It helps to thread safety and auto wide annotation we can use. We can the time zone services, and a post mapping. So post means we can creating or adding the new GTS time zone. Here successfully adding, it says started. So when it can be added successfully, it can created, or otherwise adding the mapping is successfully. So it shows that GTS time zone name cannot be in the empty, otherwise it should be an empty. Throw on the exception, that is application exception. So in the next is we can verify the time zone, its name should be used already or not used. If the name is already used, it throw on the exception, that is GTS time zone is already exists. Like this we can generating the time zone ID. It can IDs can be response in the form of HTTP status. So ID is it can be created. It can show the response in the form of status code 201 is created. The next is put mapping. Put mapping means updating the GTS time zone. So here also we can updating the ID. The ID is an invalid, it throw the exception. So ID is invalid, and ID should not be in the empty. So here also we can GTS time zone ID does not exist. So here we cannot creating the or updating the ID, it throw the exception as a ID does not exist. Here it throw the exception or it contain the false, it show it's already an exist, and it's also response in the form of HTTP status code. Okay, and the next is get mapping. So it's mapping using a ID, it can be updated in ID, and also it's updated the name and updated it's checking it's an active active time zone or it's an inactive. It can be updated the every steps. So first it will updated the name, ID, it's active or it's inactive, it can check every step. So it cannot be in the form of not null, otherwise it throw in the exception. It can also delete the mapping using the URL path. It's successfully deleted, it shows GTS time zone can be deleted, otherwise it shows GTS time zone ID is not found, like this. The next is exception. The first one is it contain the different exception: application exception, duplication exception, GTS time zone exception, and GTS time zone not found exception, and time zone custom exception. So one by one we can see. The first one is application exception. The application exception, it extends the runtime exception, means it's unchecked. Here we using the serial version UID. So serialized version, it helps to serializing and deserializing the version. So it's a unique ID. And the next, public application exception. Here we using the string message in the form of string. Here we can call the constructor as a superclass and call in the format of message and the format of the messages. The next is duplication exception. So it's also seeing it extends the runtime exception. So runtime exception means unchecked exception. It simplifies the error handling. Here also we are using the serial version UID. It helps you serializing and deserializing, and here also we can use the message in the format of string and call the constructor of superclass with the message passing like this. The next is GTS timezone exception handler. So here we using the controller advice annotation. It extends the response entity exception handler. It can be runtime exceptions. Here it override the response entity in the form of handle HTTP message not readable. It contains the headers, HTTP status and web request. It returns in the form of JSON in the status code like this. So the same as exception internal also, it contains the object and HTTP header, status, web request. It also responds in the format of JSON in the status code like this. And the next is GTS timezone not found exception. Here also we are using the serial version UID and in the class constructor, that is superclass constructor, and the timezone custom exception. Here we using the timezone custom exception handler class. This is the value using application exception class and timezone not found exception and duplication exception. Here its response in the format of string. The status code, it's in the form of bad request. Its response in the JSON format. It send the status code to the client, and it's not found. It can send the status code as a not found in the JSON format, and it's a duplication. It's a successfully it can be created, but the same file can be duplicated through and the exception, that is it's a forbidden, means 403 status code can be sent. The next is model. So model, there is a GTS timezone and user token entity. So model, here we can use the getter and setter methods. Here we can using the entity and the table as a GTS timezone table. Here we can getting the class GTS timezone and we use the ID and column JSON property ID. It helps to creating a unique ID for everyone, and column it contains the name GTS timezone ID, and JSON property it also helps to creating the ID. And the next is the same as we can create GTS timezone ID and timezone name and description status. We can create the column name and JSON property. Then we can call the constructor, that is superclass. And also here we use the integer in the form of timezone ID, and string is used in the name, and description also we are using the string data type, and boolean is used in the status. Here we are parameterize the default parameter is this dot GTS timezone ID and name description. Then we can get the timezone ID and setting the ID. So here basically it's a getter and setter methods. We can retrieve and update this ID, fetches the ID and name and the description, then status code like this. The next one is user token entity. Here also we can using this as setter and getting the method, we using the private static final serial version UID. So serial version UID helps you say unique for every serial version. It helps to serializing and deserializing the ID. Here we using the get the user ID and token, and set the user ID using the long data type, and set the token and using the primary key like this. The next is authentication. Authentication, here we can see component annotations. So it indicates the class and it's automatically detected. So authentication success handler, it redirects the page after it's authenticated, and here we implement the authentication success handler. It provides the custom logic, and we are using the request responses and authentication is successfully authenticated, otherwise it throw an the exception, IO exception and servlet exception. So is authentication is committed, it responds in the form of HTTP status code. The next one is repository, GTS Timezone repository. So here we can use the interface GTS Timezone DAO. Here we can use the parameter, that is T and S. So here retrieve the timezone name in the form of list, that is GTS Timezone, and we can using the data type as a string data type. Using the string data type we can retrieve the time zone in the list format. The next is GTS Timezone repository. In this repository we can use the repository annotation, and it extends the JPA repository. So JPA means Java Persistence API. It helps to write the SQL queries. Here we can see we can write the queries. Select the start form. So repositories helps to write the queries in the form of SQL. Here we can see we can use the find active and get maximum of Timezone ID. Get means it retrieves the data and it find the active or it's inactive, like this. And the next is user token repository. It extends this to handle the CRUD operations. In this user token repository also we can write the queries, and we can using the param method, and we can write user ID, and also we are using the transaction and modifying annotation. Transaction helps to operation should be executed within the transaction, and modifying means we all know that this query will be modifying using the database. And the next is security. The security, it contains authorization filter, user principles and web security. In the authorization, so here we using the JWT. It's a JSON web token. It's managing the JWT, and we are in the authorization filter we are using the component annotation, and we extends the once per request filter. I've already told that filter helps to initialize and filtering the request responses like this. And we using the auto wired annotation, and we JWT till JWT is a JSON web token. It's managing the JWT. And also here we can see here we use the user token repository, and we can do filter internal. Here we can use request and responses, and also instantiated the filter chain, and it throw on the exception in the servlet or IO exception, and we can authentication the token in the form of request. And here we using the token payload and login token, and we use the JSON object. And here we can see we can getting the user ID, means retrieving the user ID, extracting the user details in the form of JSON object. Here we can getting the user ID from token. It cannot be retrieving the data, it on the exception. It's a duplication exception. And also we can getting the user ID from the token and the login token and validate the token. And also we can request and responses before filtering. In the filtering we can request and responses can be instantiated. It can be responses, it can true, it give the responses. Otherwise we throw the duplication exception. It can already give the valid credential like this. The next is user principal.java. Here also we can import declare the package and import the necessary Spring framework, and we implement the user details, and we use the serial version UID. You can serializing and deserializing the data. And in the user principles we extend the granted authorities, means getting the authorities details. Here we can give the permission for all the user details. It helps to initializing the fields when new instance is created. Here it helps is account expired, or we can getting the accounts details. This account is non-locked or it's expired or it enable like this, and it's list the details. And here we can get and set the details. We can get in the user ID, means retrieve the user ID and update the user ID, and get the passwords and username it written in the format of null. And the next one is web security. In the web security we can setting up the securities. We can use the enable global methods and configuration and enable authentication. Here it extends the web security configure adapter. And also here we can use the authorization filter. The authentication, I have already told that authentication helps to redirect the page after authenticated, and it helps to automatically detect and register the Spring context. Here we can use the configure method in the HTTP security. It's also throw the exception. And here we can see we use the CS or F calls and disable the calls. I have already told that cross origin resource sharing. And C or SF is a stateless API. It helps to managing the security token. And the next is authorize request, and session management is a request and authenticated. Session management helps to it does RESTful application. It doesn't store any session data. And the session creation policies, it's a stateless API, and we can add the filter before entering the username and password authentication. We can be filter, and it override the bean, the authentication manager, and is annotated within the bean. And we can use the superclass constructor to authenticate the manager. The next is services. In the services, GTS Timezone services and GTS Timezone impl. In the GTS Timezone services we use the interface GTS Timezone services, and it helps to return the list of the GTS Timezone. And here we can add means it creating the new GTS Timezone in the form of JSON response model. And update, it means update the GTS Timezone in the JSON response model to response to the client. This is the updated. And find by Timezone means fetches the data, and return the Timezone in the format of data type string. And it's can be identified it's an active data, or it's an inactive, or it's a deleted, and it generates the new Timezone ID. So GTS Timezone service helps to fetches and retrieve the data and update it like this. And GTS Timezone impl, so it helps to managing the operation that's related to the time zone. It interact with the GTS Timezone repository to perform the CRUD operations. And here we can get the response in the format of JSON object. Here we can see it's in the form of HTTP status. Here we can see it says message in the format of true, false, and the description, the total message, how it created, and it is in the status code. So it construct the JSON response model. Here we can see it construct JSON response model. It indicates success or failure. It indicates that it's a success or failure. Here we can see it's a success, it's in the true. It's in the failure, it throw the exception, it's a false, like this. And it override the GTS time zone. It return the list of the GTS time zone. In fetches all the data, and it find means it fetches the ID, and it return the name, and it's a active data or inactive data, and also it delete the GTS time zone response model. Here we can delete it. It can be deleted successfully. It sets a success message as a true, otherwise it throw and false. Here we can generate the time zone ID. It prints like it's generating the ID, and it can be set the maximum time zone ID in the format of seconds. So it return the number of time zone. And the next one is util. In the util GTS time zone services, here we can use the Spring Boot application, and we can run the GTS time zone services. It can be service got started, it can be started the services, and we use the stream lambda handler. The stream lambda handler and allows the Spring Boot applications. Here we can see Spring Boot lambda handler to handle requests from the API gateways and other AWS services. So here we implement the request stream handler, and we can contain the, here we can see we request from AWS proxies and API gateways, and it says Spring Boot application, it build and initializing the data, otherwise it throw on the exception, that is the runtime exception, and it override the handle request. It's an input stream or output stream, otherwise it throw the proxy exceptions, like this. And in the util there is a JWT util. So JWT util we use the secret key, and JWT is a JSON Web Tokens, is a Spring application. It helps to extract the user details and the extract expirations, and it claims the string token and the functions of the data. And here we use the token is expired, or helps to validate the token using the user details. And also it can an error, it throw the duplication exception, it's a unauthorized, give the valid credential, like this. And the next is resources. Resources contains the application property. Application property contains the database details. Here we can see Spring data source is a URL, and it helps to creating the schema in the databases, and test connection, the using the username and password, and the port number. So it helps to contain the database details. And the next is we can see pom.xml. It contains my events and projects. Pom.xml means it's a project object model. It contains information of the project and configuration details. It's using the Maven to build this project. Here we using the some key functions. We can see dependencies and group ID, artifacts, and build configurations. And here we can see repository profiles, activations, builds, plugins, properties, like this. It contains the dependencies. And the last one is readme. I have already told this. Readme helps to read the documentation, and it helps to run the program. So this is all about the microservice, that is GTS time zone service. Thank you.